On this episode of Your City at Work, we're going to talk about the City of Paducah's successes from 2015 and the plans and projects for 2016. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Your City at Work. I'm Public Information Officer Pam Spencer. On this episode, we're going to talk about the state of the city. And just a couple of quick facts. The City of Paducah has roughly 300 full-time employees and 10 departments. Plus, we have a lot of partnerships with other government agencies, including Paducah Economic Development. There's other boards and agencies. We've got Joint Sewer Agency, Paducah Water. We do a lot of partnerships with McCracken County. So lots of moving parts, lots of activity. So here to talk about the state of the City of Paducah, we have Paducah Mayor Gayle Kaler and City Manager Jeff Pederson. Thank you for joining me.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, let's start with a question that I had not too long ago. Somebody asked me the form of Paducah's government, the structure of the City of Paducah's government. There's a mayor, there's a city manager. Well, we have the Kentucky statutes provide for different types of government, and we are a mayor, city manager form of government. Explain how that means for how you work together to run the city. And whoever wants to go first.
A good city manager always defers to a mayor on this question.
So we have a city manager form of government.
Right.
The city manager does all of our day-to-day running of the city, makes the decisions on hiring, employees, employee discipline, all of those things that it takes to run that city from a day-to-day basis. The mayor and the commissioners are more like the CEOs of the board.
Okay.
The mayor and the commissioner give direction on policy to the city manager for him to carry those wishes out. Anything else, Jeff?
Oh, I think that pretty well covers it. I think advantages of this form of government is that it allows the elected officials to really dedicate themselves to policy making, interaction with the citizens. They're not burdened by day-to-day administrative tasks, which I think, again, is a real advantage of the model.
Okay. Well.
So, Jeff, just give an example of an administrative request that might come to us, which really is in your purview. And we have that happen all the time.
That happens quite frequently, and and that's okay, because the elected officials are the elected representatives of the residents of the community. So it's not so important how citizen communication is funneled as it is how it's ultimately handled. And in this form of government, citizen inquiries, sometimes complaints, requests for services, really need to kind of get to the source of the action, which is usually associated with some administrative department dealing with a policy oftentimes or a program. So, the source of the best information on that are the people that are actually carrying the programs or policies out. So it works pretty efficiently. Now, from time to time, there are things that are outside of policy that come back to the commission in the form of requests to maybe initiate new policy, expand a program, change something. So that's kind of where you get into the policy end of things. It's sort of constantly evolving. Things can change, and that's uniquely the job of the city commission to do that.
And that's where it's different in other cities. In other cities, the mayor may be running those day-to-day operations and providing the vote on the city council meetings, but you're one of 5 votes on the city commission, right, and the information comes to you through the city government, but then you have the constituents going to you for information as well. So I can see where it could be a little confusing at times of how everything is pulled together, but I think it's a great partnership. I think it's a great form of government. It's just a lot of folks don't understand city manager day-to-day operations and pulling together a lot of information. And one of the big things that happens every year that the city manager is involved in with the directors, pulling together the budget. And then that ultimately comes to the City Commission for review, and then the approval, usually in June, for the fiscal year to start July 1st. Tell us how that process goes. It takes several months to pull together the city's budget, and that is something that usually around January to February, the department directors are working with finance department in addition to Jeff to get this pulled together. Kind of go over the process how this all comes together.
Well, ultimately, the development of the budget is probably the biggest task of the city manager's office. It's also the biggest policy decision that the city commission makes in its deliberations and ultimate approval of the budget. So you've got a coming together of the two components of city government right there. But here again, like much other policy development, a lot of the trench work is done at the administrative level. So each department director, you mentioned we have 10, ultimately prepares a budget request, and that's screened by the finance office and myself, and ultimately comes together in the form of a proposal to the city commission. So we usually have a pre-budget workshop with the commission early in the process to kind of give some awarenesses of some of the major issues that lie ahead. And then the budget is presented in May and usually adopted in June by the City Commission, and it takes effect on July 1.
Now, one thing that we have started doing in the last few years, it's been done previously, but I think it's really pulled together now, is capital improvement planning. How does that help you when you see information about these big projects and how they can be funded or the choices that have to be made? How does the City Commission take a look at that?
Well, we look at our priorities, and we have a long list of capital improvement projects. So, we have to go through and sort through the most important, and maybe put some of the others, delay those a bit. So it's a process of decision making that we have to go through. And because the city manager and all the different departments do such a thorough job of presenting those to us, it makes it somewhat easier. The angst in those decisions is what is the most important, that we have the available funding to make happen.
And that is the big question, available funding. There are two big funds that the City of Paducah, we use these terms a lot when we're talking about budget season, general fund and investment fund. Jeff, explain what are the difference between those two?
Well, the general fund essentially funds the operational side of city government, the day-to-day activities, police department, street, all those sort of things. And as is fairly well known, a lot of the expense associated with our programs is personnel because it's service delivery in nature. The investment fund came about 10 years or so ago in the form of a half-cent increase to the local payroll tax. And it is more specific, less with operational matters than it is projects. At least over time, that's the way it's involved. One big exception to that is the biggest part of the city's street maintenance is actually done through the investment fund, somewhere in the $750 million per year. But by and large, the investment fund has been used to finance a number of projects, a number of economic development related projects. It's also the fund that the city looks to provide support to associated agencies, partner agencies throughout the community. It also has an amount of money that sort of turns over every year that's available for the city to do relatively small projects out of. For example, 2 or 3 years ago, the commission chose to improve the bank at the pond at Noble Park. That was about $180,000 or $90,000, I believe, and that was financed through 1 year of income into the investment fund. So we didn't need to bond for that. It's nice not to have to bond for relatively small projects. So that's essentially the difference between the general fund, which is operational, and the investment fund, which is more project related and more related to the city's support for partner agencies in the community.
And I think one of the most successful things that we have done with that investment fund is neighborhood revitalization.
That's a good point. That was one of the purposes that it was created for. I'm glad you brought that up because that was a big omission on my part not to mention that. Obviously, that's the funding that's been behind the Fountain Avenue redevelopment, and the city has allocated around $250,000 to $300,000 a year for the past 8 or 9 years for Fountain Avenue, and obviously the results of that show it's one of the most successful programs, I think, in the history of Paducah city government, and it's a neighborhood revitalization project that has national acclaim. It's a model throughout the country for successful neighborhood revitalization, so it's something the commission and staff and the whole community are very proud of.
Just a couple of quick stats about the Fountain Avenue. It started in 2007, your first year as commissioner, so you've watched it grow and change over the last few years. In that period of time, 354 permits issued for work on 188 different addresses. It's a lot of work. 32 new residential structures, more than $11 million invested, and 70 rehabs of at least $10,000. That is a success story in itself.
Well, and you know you're successful in a neighborhood revitalization when the value of the properties come up to the point that you can go to the bank and get a loan.
Right.
You know, previous to that, we had to use different programs to finance those homes. So, you know, it shows that we have been very successful there. And Steve Irwin has done a great job with Fountain Avenue. You know, we had a lot of success with Lower Town, and so we wanted to take that to another neighborhood. A lot of young people are living there now, so it's wonderful to see families. All of the different organizations within that neighborhood have been very supportive with churches, Midtown Alliance of Neighbors. So it's a partnership that makes a real success.
And it has been wonderful. It definitely is well known across the nation. Lower Town is known, but then you start seeing Fountain Avenue. It doesn't have that extra catch of having artists there. It's families. It's a typical neighborhood that you would find in any city, but we have done it right. We definitely have revitalized it correctly. It's taken years, but it does take time to do something like that. I want to mention another project that I think it's another example of wonderful management, looking at a whole project, but the outcome is not what anybody wanted. But it's an example of good management. And I want to see if you agree. The Broadway, 432 Broadway demolition project. Do you agree that it's something that has been managed over years? It just didn't have the outcome that anybody wanted, but it's an example of the city being active in managing.
Well, I think you have to be proactive when it comes to buildings that can cause a safety issue for our citizens. You know, that's part of our responsibility. One of the major things with city government is safety for the citizens. We've got many new programs with downtown that we hope in the future will prevent some of these issues with those big buildings. But we didn't have a choice, and it's wonderful that we were able to get the CDBG grant to help us with that. We didn't have as much risk financially with the CDBG grant. I think we've done everything, I think, perfectly there, actually.
It's one of those that I think, hindsight, I don't think we see a lot of errors. I don't think we see that.
I think that
We've been
it's
very
unfortunate.
careful about how we've approached it.
It's unfortunate that the building became in the condition it was, and I suppose some people might argue that there's something the city could have done. If there's anything we could have done, and I'm not saying we should have done that, but it might have been associated with some kind of a intensive inspection program of building structure and building roofs, but that's a balancing act too. Others would view that as being heavy-handed on the part of the city. So, you know, we dealt with the situation when it became essentially, as the mayor said, a public safety issue, and tried everything we could to work with the property owner, to incite the property owner, work with the property owner to try to save the building. But ultimately, in the opinion of numerous structural engineers, the building was beyond saving. So our course of action was to find a way to deal with that. And we managed to be pretty successful on the financial part of that with obtaining a state grant. But, you know, that's a credit to the resources the city has with our staff, and with, I think, also the willingness to proceed with that deliberately. It's not been a convenient situation downtown with the fence down there as long as it's been, but it's the patience and the deliberation that allowed us to thoughtfully deal with the problem and ultimately save the taxpayers over $500,000 by qualifying to obtain a state grant for the demolition.
Yes, we did get a $500,000 CDBG grant, so that was, and we got the grant after we had already started the project. And that takes some good management and good skills to be able to
It
do
also
something.
takes a willingness to take a little risk, but I think it was our confidence in our game plan and ultimately that led the City Commission to be okay with essentially taking on the obligation for that and letting a contract for the demolition before we knew we had the grant. Now, we all let out a collective sigh of relief,
Right.
but nonetheless, we had a lot of confidence that we would get it too.
Some other big projects that we have, I labeled this the sleeping giant, the flood wall. It's been there for decades. It has proven its worth. You go back to the 2011 flood when we had 5 feet of water up against the flood wall. But it's something that it needs some rehabilitation. The city did start working on some of the rehabilitation projects a few years ago when we did the slip lining of a few of the pipes. And that's where we went into some of the pipes, put in another pipe, and then did the grout around it. And we did do some of those that needed desperate attention. But what's the process right now? Because the Corps of Engineers has said that there are a lot of projects still to be done on that flood wall. So what are we considering, waiting on? Kind of what's the status?
The project that we're working on right now is mainly the pump station, some of the pipes.
Pump station number 2, the big one by the wastewater treatment plant, the outfall area. There are 5 pumps in there, a lot of metal components that have been in place for over 50 years now that are under a lot of pressure, water pressure, and eventually corrode and lose a lot of their structural strength. In fact, a number of the metal components of the pumps and the gates have eroded by more than half from the original thickness and strength. So a lot of the mechanics of the flood wall, the parts of the flood wall, the operational part that people do not see, need to be replaced. And our game plan is to start with pump station number 2, which is really the main one. And as far as our partnership with the Corps, we met with the Corps just last week, and we have a little bit of understanding of the pathway to federal funding. Having said that, we're grateful we have a little bit of understanding. Unfortunately, it's not as near term as we'd hoped it was. So we are working with the Corps to create an allowance whereby the city might go ahead and initiate a phase 1 project on its own, using its own money while still qualifying for federal matching funds, in other words, shared costs, once the federal appropriations become available. So we'll be having a workshop on that within the next month or so and bringing that information forward to the City Commission, and they'll ultimately decide if they're comfortable going ahead with a project before federal funding becomes available, just based on the immediacy of the need. And of course, that's all based on the importance of pump station number 2 and how critical it is, not just daily, but during heavy rainfall events as well.
In our partnership that we have, we're not waiting for 100% funding from the federal government. It's what, 65-35?
35.
So
And
we're never going to be covered completely. We have to set aside funding and look at this.
Well, we really do, and I was really referring to the 65% share that we do not have a good timeline on when that might become available, but what we think we would be able to do is initiate a project with our own funds and really qualify for the 65% credit on the money we spent towards a future phase of the project. So it's sort of banking money in a sense. Ultimately, we would still get 65% federal participation. We would just have to pay 100% out of our own pocket for a period of time until the federal appropriations became available.
And they were very complimentary of Paducah being proactive and managing the situation with the flood wall and taking charge of fixing some of those things.
Because we've initiated a lot of projects on our own.
Right, and apparently we're one of the few communities that do that, so
Right.
go Paducah again.
Go Paducah. Well, another project that is water related, stormwater management. It's something that it came up last year when we had heavy rains. What's the city looking to do with stormwater and drainage?
Well, after that happened, and we had so many citizens that came to us with such damages to their home. I talked to the city manager and I said, when did we do a last stormwater update? And it had been several years, I
At
think.
least 15 years, yeah.
So that's when we started the conversation about the need for updating our stormwater management plan. So that will be brought to us for another workshop. There'll be a separate workshop because it's a high-ticket item, but I think it's something that we need to do.
Well, infrastructure is so important. I see a lot of articles coming out about every city having to look at their infrastructure and really take a look at streets, roads, drainage, everything like that, because a lot of projects were initiated a few decades ago, and now it's got to look at the infrastructure. Another piece of infrastructure, City Hall. That's a project that's being reviewed. We've had Ratio Architects, a firm that is looking at the various options. What kind of update would you like to give the citizens about City Hall?
Once again, I think we've had a great plan that we followed. We have thoroughly looked at both, at renovation of City Hall as well as a new build. I appointed the citizens schematic team that worked with Ratio, gave input. They didn't actually make any decisions about the plan, but gave them input on the plans that they were working on. So we have those two plans finished now, ready for the public to have some input at the end of the month.
It'll be late February or early March.
Right. So, you know, the public's going to get to have input into both those processes. And after that, they'll be brought to the City Commission. Ultimately, the Commission and I will have to make that decision. What do we do
with the structure?
Yes.
Another project, this one's going to make you smile, the hotel.
Yes, it's great. Yeah, $23 million investment in downtown. You know, it's exciting to drive by there and see the steel come up out of the ground, because I still have people say, "Are we getting a hotel?"
Well,
I'll go, "Have you driven down there lately?"
Well, we did the State of the City a year ago. This hotel was not even on the radar.
Right.
This group who came to Paducah and saw how wonderful it
Gate
is.
Hospitality and their development group that mainly does hotels. I think that's all they do. And they're very professional. They make quick decisions. They move behind those decisions and move forward. And that's what they're doing here in Paducah.
That is it, definitely. It was a quick process.
Well, I'd like to make the
But
point.
we had that pre-planning, all that
Pre-plan.
work we had done.
There was
for a
3
year.
to 5 years total that really went
Right.
into that, but and very intensely for the couple of years prior to last year. And oftentimes folks don't have a feel for how complex things are, but I mean, all kinds of issues had been dealt with prior to the time Lindgate came along, which allowed the Lindgate process to come together very quickly. But had we started from ground zero, where we would have been 2 or 3 years before that, there's a fair amount of time that would have been required to pull things together going forward from when Lindgate first appeared. So
all that work beforehand made all the difference in the world to Lindgate.
it did.
They were ready to go, and we were ready to go.
Exactly.
So,
And the hotel will be open in 2017?
yes, spring of 2017.
That will be wonderful. Another project is right next door, the Riverfront project. What's the latest on the Riverfront project?
Right now, they're staging
Yeah.
to be able to offload and finish out the transient boat dock park. And then we have all that area from that park all the way down to the convention center. And
Where the old
that's-
executive inn
right.
used to be. Because the Riverfront project that's under construction is going to be the large park that is expanding out into the water. It's going to include the gangway to get to a 20-foot transient dock. That's that main part. That's what's under construction.
Right.
And then there's the other little section that is between where the hotel's going in and that Riverfront area.
You said little sections.
Little
It's actually
section.
6 acres.
It's 6 acres.
It's a large area. You know, the biggest issue with that right now, it's rather unsightly. It really doesn't beckon people to, you know, come across it. In fact, if anything, it's a statement, you know, stay out of here. So there's some kind of conversion that needs to take place aesthetically and to make that more inviting for people to move across. And of course, there are degrees of how much more you can add to it beyond that. And there's a master plan that was put together about a year ago that is still under review. It's a ways away from any kind of final design. But clearly, it's going to stick out even more with the hotel going in and the completion of the Riverfront project. It begs for some attention to convert it from what is really an unsightly, unusable area to something that at the very least adds something to or doesn't take away from the ambiance down in that area.
Well, and we're going to have that connection of the Greenway Trail between Campbell Street and the new Riverfront Park. So, that's going to be exciting to have that extension of the Greenway Trail, so you can bring your bike down, get on the trail there and go all the way out to County Park Road.
And it's a great trail. I enjoy the Greenway Trail.
It is.
As a jogger.
And that's
I enjoy
something
it.
that we've completed recently, which has been really great for the citizens of Paducah.
Oh, it's a wonderful trail. I encourage everybody to go walk a dog, just go walking, enjoy the Greenway Trail. The next topic I want to talk about is not so tangible. It's technology. There is something that the City of Paducah is working on. It's Enterprise Resource Planning, ERP. What is that?
Well,
hear ERP.
enterprise refers to system-wide, which is really what this is. It's a introduction of a new system software platform that brings with it connectivity between all of our operations in ways that they can, starting with a shared database, shared retrieval systems for data, all of which adds up to the ability to provide better customer service, operate more efficiently, improve communication flow at the staff level, communication flow from staff to citizens, from staff to elected officials. It's a huge undertaking. It's a multi-year undertaking. We're excited about it. We're excited about everything it can do. We're a little nervous by the amount of work that goes into it. We're also a little nervous about how important it is to have continuity in the implementation side between all of our departments. So we're making sure we put in place the tools to have the linkages between departments so that everybody is progressing on the same pace and everybody gets there at the same time. It would not be a very good thing to have departments of the city that are not up to full utilization while others are. So we think that's a very important piece of how we go about implementing this thing. And it's about a 3-year process from start to finish. And as it stands right now, we're just on the cusp of actually making the purchase. So we would expect to be underway actively sometime in the next 3 or 4 months.
And that's something that you don't really see, but everybody who works in city government will feel it. and
Hopefully
then
everybody
eventually
will feel it,
The
yes.
citizens will too.
Right, because it will give citizens easier access
Yes.
to paying. They'll be able to pay online, am I correct?
Among
with that?
other things, be able to do some things online that previously may have required a
Right.
trip to City Hall, increase our ability to provide information out in different platforms, better illustrations, more detail, all of those kinds of things. It's just a big step forward for us in the use of technology and automation and really putting us on the forefront, I think, of technology for what's out there for city governments to use. And the company that we are contracting for is a very experienced company in the municipal market, have been associated with a large user group of municipal users in the past. So their software products are very well refined, very advanced, and again, we're very excited about that, but it's kind of like jumping on a running horse. We need to find a way to do that and stay on until the finish line.
Well, another example of getting information and compiling it, the Paducah Police Department has hired a crime analyst. And information that is being pulled that was already there, but pulling it and putting it into different formats with this crime analyst has been really revolutionary, I think, for the police department. What have you seen, Jeff, that they are doing?
Well, I think its very name, Analyst, is intended to convert to more of a data-driven decision-making process. Internally, there's a lot of use for that. It can create some awarenesses that might not have either been there or were a little more difficult to find. It certainly also provides powerful illustrations of information to the public. The public is very curious about government, but yet the expectation is that we make it as easy to understand and as clear as we possibly can. So I think the crime analyst, with some of the tools that this person has, and working with our own IT department and GIS department, has begun to kick out some very, very powerful graphics that provide some illustrations that not only are helpful internally, but also are able to be understood by the public.
And they're using a lot of that information that is already generated through our 911 center. I find that very interesting that this is information that we have here, and now they're taking it and being able to make quick charts. They're being able to make bar graphs that just automatically pop up and that are being refreshed every hour. And this is internally for the officers to use, but it really is going to create some new efficiencies out there.
Well, and I think that's an advantage to having local-based services under the same umbrella. As you have those linkages, you have those opportunities for shared data, shared resources, and with the 911 center being under local operation, we have a very close tie-in with our GIS. In fact, it's in the same building, so it couldn't be any closer than it really is. So that's a real advantage, I think, operationally, to get the data out from there and into the system, and then produce the information in the form that the users really can benefit from.
Changing gears a little bit, what do you say to folks who say, oh, there's nothing to do in Paducah?
Oh, gosh. I mean, there is so much to do on a given night, you can't get around to it all. I mean,
And that is
it's
true.
out there. We have so many different programs that the city has that we have worked on in the last few years, but it's not just what we're doing, it's what the community is doing as well. And I think, one of them maybe feeds off the other. It's that synergy between government recreational opportunities and the ones created within the community. So some of the things are the farmers market, the downtown events that we do in the summer, which have been very well received. The different things that the Parks Department does, they're amazing, with the movies in the park, the events on the Riverfront. I think everybody enjoys all of the different festivals and parades that we have in the City of Paducah. But I think the important part is the other things that the private industry here in Paducah has created.
And that's one thing I know that our special events coordinator and our Main Street director, they both look into what else is going on in the community at certain nights so that they don't schedule things that conflict. And then they try to schedule things that might be for a family to go to at 6 o'clock and then they could go see something else at 9 o'clock. So it's a lot of coordination, a lot of events going on, but they are talking. They're trying to make sure that they plan days.
And everything's free.
So much of it is free.
There's, some of the events, some of the things they have with the parks, some of the programs, but the things that we do downtown, that's all free for the public.
Our concerts that we have on Thursday nights, the Live on the River that we have on Saturday nights, they're not every Saturday night and they're not every Thursday night, but they're events that you plan your calendar around.
And family events, so.
Very family friendly.
You can't get better than free. I mean.
Oh, no, you can't. You can have some great times with those free events. Also, I want to mention, we had FLW. We had a big tournament here.
They love Paducah. They really enjoyed being here, and they want to come back again. They had a great time. They had good facilities. People were friendly to them. And that's one of the things about Paducah. Paducah is such a friendly community. Everyone that comes here wants to come back again.
Well, that was the FLW. It was a fishing tournament, 346 anglers with an estimated economic impact of $750,000. And that was one tournament. So we want more of those.
Yeah, we do.
The next topic I'd like to discuss, as we're kind of wrapping up the episode here, engagement. We look to engage the citizens in a variety of ways, and we are doing for this year something that we did 3 years ago, a citizen survey. What do you think the importance of a citizen survey is?
As elected officials, we get a good gauge of what's important to our citizens. They can be very honest with that.
It's anonymous, yes.
Right, it's anonymous, and it's random. So you're going to get a wide cross-section of the public. So I applaud you and Jeff. I'm sure you were the two that worked together on that. It was probably Jeff's idea, but Pam is very handy in that too.
Pam has been the project manager. Right. Our thought going in is let's ask the public how we're doing, because if we only rely on our own opinion, we may be overly complimentary from time to time. So that's the essence of it. Our services are rated by the public, and what we did with that information 3 years ago, and what we plan to do again, is hold a workshop with the commission and the department directors and take a look at the areas that we're not doing as well in as we would like, or as the public would like, and have an all-day workshop and come up with some ideas of how to do better. Pam, you led that process last year. What were the 3 areas that, I'm interviewing you, what were the 3 areas that we picked out and put some thought and some process to?
Well, we created 3 committees. One was economic development, to take a look at just our economic development decisions, the whole process of how we make economic development decisions.
And from there we developed some new policy the commission did.
One was neighborhood revitalization, and that one had all kinds of topics, from bike trails, trying to make us more bike friendly, to what's the next neighborhood we may want to look at revitalizing after Fountain Avenue. So that committee tackled a bunch of different topics. And then the other committee was citizen engagement. How can we better get the information out that we have in city government and gather that information coming in? And so we worked on that project, and that has led over the last 3 years to updating the look of the city's website, making it mobile friendly, so when you pull it up on any kind of smartphone or a tablet, it scales so that you can read it easier. Other initiatives started in the last 3 years, Coffee with a Cop, and that's been a great one, with the police officers sitting at a local restaurant and having coffee with the citizens. Fire Prevention Division has really worked on different ways to engage, and that's something that I think has been underestimated of its importance, of all the engagement that they have been doing, because the rest of the state is making comments about how good Paducah is at pulling together Western Kentucky when it comes to fire prevention and code enforcement and property maintenance. So, Jeff, I think you probably wanted to add a little bit to that, of how that division's been working.
Well, it continues to progress, and one of the later objectives that came about after we did some of our internal thing was, well, how can we get on the same page with other agencies in the outlying area that our folks talk to, some of our contractors work with and work for, and endeavor to have consistency in some of the practices and applications. So that's been a focus for the last couple of years, and we've become a leader in regional coming together around those issues, and in fact the state is now looking to model some of its programs after what has been initiated by our local division. So that's pretty neat, but it, more than anything, it's been effective. I think we have cut down on some of the instances, or some of the feeling that we do things differently here than what is done in Murray or Benton or some other communities, and people like to see the same ground rules from place to place to place, and sometimes these aren't very big things or differences. They can be differences of interpretation. So we've brought in national speakers that have provided a lot of good experience-based information about the most effective way to do things, the the way that achieves an end in a way that strikes a good balance between the city as sort of the regulator and the interests of the property owner or the contractor. And by the way, contractors attend these sessions as well, so it's not just the city people coming together, it's also the other partners in development efforts such as contractors, and we've had some property owners attend as well, so it's been a good thing.
It's been good, and it's being noticed across the state, so I applaud the Fire Prevention Division.
And it's a good way for contractors to get their CEU hours.
That's
too.
true, too.
Oh, yes, because every October we've had that, it's been a conference that's been 2 to 3 days. I think they expanded it last year, and they've got building code information, and they can get their continuing education.
And I want to send a shout out to you too, Pam, for what you have contributed to our public engagement improvements over the last few years as well, particularly with the city's website and how attractive that is, how navigable it is, the information that's there at the click of a button. Transparency is a big thing, and two-way communication is always hard to effect. It's time-consuming. It takes a willingness on the part of two parties to do that, and we're always about that, but when that's not possible, people know that they can go into our website and find all kinds of information, a lot of important documents, updates on things we're doing, and done very accessibly and very easily, even now, as you said, with iPhones. So I think we're a leader in that area as well, and I think the public sees that and appreciates it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And every time we have a project, I just want to try to explain it to somebody. It's that need to make sure they understand. I think it goes back to an old teaching background I had years ago. But also, folks, if they just want to get emails, we send out information about city commission meetings, news releases. All I need is an email address, and then that information goes out. Because a lot of times Tuesday nights after the city commission meeting, I'm one of the last ones to leave City Hall. I'm trying to summarize what just happened. And it can be interesting, and it can be fun to try to summarize. Well, we have talked for more than 30 minutes here. This is a 30-minute episode, but we go longer on the state of the city. Anything that you both want to talk about, anything that we left out? There's a lot of projects out there, but anything that you want to say, closing remarks?
I do think we have a lot of projects before us to make decisions on, but I think they're very important projects that can change the way Paducah looks, the way Paducah lives in the next many years.
Right.
You know, things go in a 50-year life cycle. City Hall's 50 years old, the flood wall's 50 years old. You know, and I want to applaud Jeff too. When he came here, he saw the importance of property maintenance, our property, the city's property, and that we really didn't put much back for that, and he's instituted that since he's been here. So we'd like to put more back, but we have $150,000 a year that we put back into our property maintenance. So you know, that's one of the hardest things that a city deals with. Is how do you maintain everything to the level of expectation? And then you have to think, well, what is our expectation? And that's where the citizen survey comes in with helping us understand that.
Okay, Jeff?
Well, just to piggyback on, thank you for your comments, but I think it's important for the public to note as well that we invest for the long period.
Right.
When we get involved in infrastructure improvements or extend an infrastructure system, we're doing it for decades, and so it requires that it be done in a way that's going to be stable for a long period of time. We don't want to have to go in and replace things every decade or two, whether it's a street or a curb and gutter system or some component of a building. So people see price tags that sometimes surprise them, and they wonder why we can't do things more of a smaller scale from time to time. But here again, the assets that the city has to maintain are critical to our service delivery system, so it's essential that they be maintained and reinvested in a way that's going to ensure their continued capability to perform and do what they need to do.
Well, there's a lot on the city's plate right now. Lots of big investments to be made and big projects to be determined and managed, and I applaud both of you. It's hard work.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you do, Pam.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining me today. We have Paducah Mayor Gayle Kaler and City Manager Jeff Pederson. And don't forget, you can see this video as well as all types of videos on the city's YouTube page and the city's website. And you'll find all kinds of information about city government. So stay informed, stay up to date, and stay tuned. There's a lot going on with the City of Paducah. I want to thank you so much for watching Your City at Work.